Non-metallic metal, NMM. You tend to hear these things, technical acronyms, when you're sinking deeper into the colorful swamp of miniature painting. Advanced techniques that go from being unapproachable to becoming alluring. Non-metallic metal is just what it sounds like. Instead of painting with a paint based on an actual metallic pigment, regular paints are used, painting shadows, highlights, reflections that mimic a metallic surface. Different colors are used, yellows for gold, gray for steel, green for emeraldium. Non-metallic metal is considered to be one of the more difficult techniques to master. And like with anything that is perceived to be difficult, prestige usually comes to the table for a light snack on your self-esteem when approached. So why am I, for the first time, seriously trying this out? My issue lies with the fact that I seldom appreciate how real metallic metal looks on my miniatures. There are not enough shadows, sharp highlights like lights playing across the surface, reflecting changes in color, all these things that would happen if we had a real metallic object, only tiny, in a real but tiny world. And therein lies the issue with non-metallic metal. All of a sudden, I'm supposed to be painting shadows, highlights, reflections, all based on how light actually reflects off a specific geometrical shape. Light reflects in a specific way depending on the shape of the surface it hits, and of course depending on the type of surface, scratched or polished, and the position and type of light source. Tricky. The only large metallic object I have to illustrate this is an artillery shell from the Second World War that I use as an umbrella stand. So this could be an example that represents a gun barrel. The top half of this shape reflects light from the sky, and the bottom half reflects shadows from the ground in varying degrees. Moving the shell vertically obviously alters the perceived reflections, and if, let's say, this was all lit from a lava river at my feet instead of the sky, the reflections would change drastically, and I would be getting severe burn damage. Metallic surfaces also reflect what's surrounding it. A really shiny surface will act almost like a mirror, so colors have to be added to the reflections. For example, a knight in shining armor standing in a green field would have a lot of green reflections going. I think because of all of this, a certain style of non-metallic metal in miniature painting is developed. Real non-metallic metal is just too much. So a stylization of the technique is more common, making stuff look shiny and metallic in an almost cartoonish way. It looks really cool, but not very realistic. With all this in mind, I set about forgetting about it all. I have no intention to paint realistic non-metallic metal, and I don't really strive for the stylization either. What I want is depth. An exaggerated sense of contrast, big differences between light and dark, that is, that looks sort of like gold. Well, used on the battlefield, unpolished kind of a gold, with attitude. Because that is what I haven't been able to create with real metallic paints. And I'm not striving for display, award-winning work. I want this for my tabletop miniatures. Non-metallic metal is not really known as something done in an instant. I realize that. But I wanted to attempt a middle ground. The first step approaching non-metallic metal is finding paints that resemble the desired metal. I took the easy way out and bought a gold non-metallic metal set. It's always a good idea to let professionals do the thinking for you. I then divided the set, starting out using only the shadows and midtones. These were paints ranging from a dark grey to a yellow-brown. The first choice of paint attack was the Zenithal Prime. Zenithal Prime the miniature and make sure I paint while following the Zenithal highlights and shadows religiously, in sense swapping out the black and white Zenithal for a yellow and grey one. This would hopefully result in a respectable representation of light reflections. I used a technique called wet blending for this, a technique that I have described in depth in a previous video together with the Zenithal priming. Wet blending would not only give me shadows, midtones and highlights, but also a texture, brush strokes and so forth, that could be perceived as a worn metallic surface. I purposely tried here and there to exaggerate what I imagine is the nature of metallic reflections, sharp contrast between light and dark, so midtones were kind of chucked out the window. After this first yellowish sketch of light, I highlighted the miniature, gradually, as in thinking of gradients, never covering the original paint completely, but working up the highlights with lighter and lighter shades, using the rest of the paints from the box. Now, metal shines. Translate that to a regular paint, and the sharpest shine you can get is a white. Adding a small white blob on the edge of a highlight will make something look like it blings in the sun. Adding a lot of white highlights will make something look really, really shiny all over, like a high polished edge. I rarely touched undiluted white, setting for blends of brighter and brighter yellow. The whole process of highlighting was surprisingly self-evident when working on top of the wet blended zenithal primed surface. All the time trying to envision where a metal would shine, obviously surfaces pointing towards the sky, but also edges that might be more polished because of wear. And especially doing the small dots of bling was something I felt added to the metallic look. By now I was kind of pleased and set about painting the rest of the miniature, loincloths, and it's got these lovely wings that remind me of Icarus, that I managed to mess up with some really blotchy stippling, and then they broke just by me looking at them. While painting everything not gold, I started kind of thinking the gold color looked a bit like mustard. Can you paint a mini with mustard? Probably not. But it kind of looked like I did. So my final stage was to add a little bit of red to the mid-tone yellow-gold mixture and just dabble that in here and there, very thinly. A professional would probably call it glazing. The difference was not massive, but in my eye, it reduced a bit of the mustard effect. And I was once more reminded of the importance of sometimes taking a step back from the details and just looking at the whole picture. Well, miniature in this case. Sometimes we just can't see the mustard because we're too focused on individual details. There are strong opinions on how, why, or why not non-metallic metal should be dispersed onto a miniature. Few are able to use this style to the extent that it actually looks like a real miniature metallic surface. On top of that, there is absolutely nothing wrong with real metallic metal. Colors with metallic pigment in them, that is. I really like it on magic and robots. But non-metallic metal really does seem to have its place in my style of painting. And in my opinion, non-metallic metal does not have to obey any rules but your own. If you like what you see when you're painting, then it's right. Even if you just kind of like what you see, and it does remind you slightly of mustard, but it was fun to paint, then it's right. I finished this miniature in a day, parrot, duck, bird and all. And this is a lot of time for someone that's, only painting a few hours a week. But it's fast enough for me to keep on painting my style of non-metallic metal for the tabletop.